Today I'm going to tell you something about the Nativity that will probably blow your mind. You're probably familiar with the traditional Nativity story where Joseph and a very pregnant Mary arrive at the town of Joseph's heritage, which was Bethlehem, because Roman Emperor Caesar Augustus wanted to take a census of his entire empire. When they arrived, they discovered that there was no room for them in the commercial inn. So having been turned away, they find the only available place, which happens to be a stable, in which Mary gives birth to baby Jesus that very night and then places him in a manger. But Kenneth Bailey, professor of Middle Eastern and New Testament studies, has recently pointed to 3 problems with this traditional nativity account in his book, Jesus Through Middle Eastern Eyes. He says that the 3 problems are: 1, that Jesus was not born the very night that Mary and Joseph arrived in Bethlehem. Secondly, Mary and Joseph were not turned away from a local commercial inn. And 3rd, that Jesus was not born in a stable. So let's get to it. First, were Mary and Jesus turned away from a commercial inn, forcing them to resort to a stable? Well, in his gospel, Luke refers to Bethlehem as the city of David, but technically the city of David was Jerusalem. The only people who called Bethlehem the city of David were the people from Bethlehem. They were proud that Israel's greatest king had originated in their little town. So the family of David would have been something of a celebrity to people living in Bethlehem. Now, because Joseph was a direct descendant of David, all he would have had to do was reveal his lineage, and it's difficult to imagine why anybody would turn him away. Furthermore, because Bethlehem was Joseph's hometown, it's likely that he first would have gone to relatives' home before trying to find a room in a commercial inn, making it all the less likely that Jesus would have been born in a stable. But even if we assume that Mary and Joseph were turned away from a local commercial inn, and that there was no hospitality in Bethlehem for a woman nearing childbirth, they could just as easily have visited Mary's cousin Elizabeth, who lived a hop, skip, and a leap away from Bethlehem. Elizabeth and Zachariah, with the newborn son John, lived in the hill country of Judea, which happened to be about where Bethlehem was located. Secondly, was Jesus born the night that they arrived in Bethlehem? Well, Luke records that while Mary and Joseph were in Bethlehem, the time came for the baby to be born. The wording suggests that they were in Bethlehem for some time before Jesus was born. A couple of days, maybe even longer. Now, this is contrary to the traditional assumption that Jesus was born the night that they arrived. But the Bible doesn't say that. What it does say is, while they were there, the time had come. Now, if time passed between their arrival in Bethlehem and Jesus' birth, and if they had no place to stay when they arrived in Bethlehem, surely they would have made the short trek over to Zachariah and Elizabeth's house. Now, I know what you're thinking, but doesn't Luke also say that Mary and Joseph placed Jesus in a manger because there was no room for him in an inn? Well, you see, the normal Greek word for commercial inn is this word right here, which is literally translated to receive all, like a hotel. This is the word used by Luke in the Good Samaritan in Luke chapter 10. Here's how it reads. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him and went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey and brought him to an inn and took care of him. The next day, he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. Look after him, he said, and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expenses you may have. Now, the word often translated as inn in the Nativity story is actually this word right here. And it means space, as in a place to stay, like a guest room. In Luke 22, Jesus uses the same word in reference to a guest room where he and his disciples were to celebrate the Last Supper. The person's guest room was attached to their house, the upper room. Now, here's how that reads. As you enter the city, a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him to the house that he enters, and say to the owner of the house, the teacher asks, where is the guest room, where I may eat the Passover with my disciples? He will show you a large room upstairs, all furnished. Make preparations there. Now, the word used for guest room in Luke chapter 22 by Jesus is the exact same word used in the Nativity story in Luke chapter 2. But what about the manger? It says that Jesus was laid in a manger, and where a manger is found, if not in a stable? Well, the answer is a house. It's a cultural thing. Kenneth Bailey writes this. For the Western mind, the word manger invokes the word stable or barn. But in traditional Middle Eastern villages, this is not the case. People of great wealth would naturally have had separate quarters for animals, but simple village homes in Palestine often had but 2 rooms. One was exclusive for guests. That room could be attached to the end of the house or even on top of it, such as the case with the upper room. The main room was a family room where the entire family cooked, ate, slept, and lived. The end of the room next to the door was either a few feet lower than the rest of the house or blocked off with heavy timbers. Each night into the designated area, the family cow, donkey, and a few sheep would be driven, and every morning those same animals would be taken out and tied up into the courtyard of the house. The animal stall would then be cleaned each day. Such simple homes can be traced from the time of David to the middle of the 20th century. The typical home of a villager at the time of Jesus looked something like this. The entrance was a little lower and is where the animals were tied up during the night. The mangers were at the edge of the main living space to allow the animals to eat, and at the back of the house, or sometimes at the top of the house, was the guest room. Now Matthew's Gospel confirms this reading. According to Matthew, Joseph and Mary were still in Bethlehem with their newborn baby when the Magi arrived, which means that the Magi must have arrived within 8 days of Jesus' birth, because the family had not yet returned to Nazareth in Galilee. Now remember, they were only in Bethlehem for the census. And Luke chapter 2 verse 39 says that after Jesus was dedicated on his 8th day, the family had returned to Nazareth in Galilee after a short stint in Egypt, of course, according to Matthew 2:13. Here's how Matthew reads. On coming to the house, the Magi saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. The point is that Matthew describes the place where Mary and Joseph and Jesus were staying as a house, not a commercial inn or a stable. So here's the true nativity story. Joseph went up from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea, to Bethlehem, the town of David, because he belonged to the house and line of David. He went there to register with Mary, who was pledged to be married to him and was expecting a child. While they were there, the time came for the baby to be born, and she gave birth to her firstborn, a son. She wrapped him in clothes and placed him in a manger in the main living room, because there was no guest room available for them in the house. Now that's the true nativity story. And as is in the Bible, Shalom. Merry Christmas, and thanks for watching.